You're in the place where mysteries and the missing meet, where conspiracies lurk around every corner. Welcome to the Deep, Dark Truth.
Welcome back to the Deep, Dark Truth. I'm Mo.
I'm Chip. And I'm Mikey.
Today is our first day back from our impromptu 2-week hiatus, so we are on new mics.
New year, new Mikey.
Yeah. So just bear with us a little bit if for some reason something goes funky in this audio, as it's our first time with these mics. Hopefully it shouldn't be a problem. So today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Lauren Spierer. And actually, this is a Mikey episode. It's been deemed a Mikey episode.
Well, we've all put in some work onto it, but yeah, I've done a lot.
I've sat here.
Before we get started, we of course like to support other podcasts. So here is a promo from our friends at Homo Ground.
Are you tired of listening to the same playlists over and over again? Are you ready for something new? Discover the latest music from LGBTQIA musicians on Homo Ground. There's so much music ready for you to devour, like this song by Carl X. What are you waiting for? Visit homoground.com or search Homo Ground on your favorite podcast app. Same ground, different sound. You're on Homo Ground.
Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So, the disappearance of anyone, let alone a female student in America, is unfortunately not that shocking. And just last year, almost 250,000 women under the age of 21 were in fact reported missing. So naturally, smaller than 1% get some sort of national coverage in any medium of the media. However, the disappearance we are going to discuss did. So what makes this disappearance stick out from all the rest? Well, I would have to agree with almost anyone who knows anything about this case. It's a vanishing act. In the instance of Lauren Spierer, it is truly baffling disappearance and one that still remains unsolved and with no body to prove death. Now Lauren's disappearance is so baffling that Time magazine published an article in 2019 titling it The 5 Most Mysterious Unsolved Disappearances of All Time. Which I'm actually shocked that I didn't hear about this before.
What were the other 4?
The other 4 were Malaysia Airline Flight 370, D.B. Cooper,
Chips Bay,
Jimmy Hoffa, and Amelia Earhart.
So the first time I ever heard about this case was from Mikey after he read this article. But upon going through it, I realized I actually had heard of it before,
Right.
But just in little bits and pieces, never the entire story, enough for it to be recognizable to me, like right off the bat.
Right. Lauren was born in 1991 to Charlene and Robert Spierer and grew up in Scarsdale, New York. She graduated from Edgemont High in 2009 and was accepted to Indiana University, where she studied textiles and merchandising in hopes of working in the fashion industry. At the time of her disappearance, she was 20 years old and in her sophomore year at IU.
Before we get too into things, just a little background information that Mikey's going to talk about that's going to become relevant. But one of the things I wanted to mention was that there is a lot of drinking and suspected drug use involved in this case. And there will be a discussion about tolerance and patterns of behavior that may help us understand why certain people involved reacted the way they did. And so we're not going to hide those things, but we want to make it very clear that these circumstances may have some way contributed to her disappearance or possible death in some way, either from being caught unaware or due to an accident. But in no way does that mean that Lauren is responsible for whatever befell her. In no way are we placing any blame on her for being inebriated. We have to remember that she's a 20-year-old college student, and 20-year-old college students on the weekend in the summer drink. And they don't necessarily all binge drink. They don't all necessarily binge heavily, but enough of them do to where it's the status quo. Every college movie that anybody has ever watched, even if they didn't go to college themselves, there's a reason that that's a trope. Like, because it's so commonplace. So we just want to make it very clear that none of those things are judgments, and none of them make her less worthy of being found or of her parents and family members knowing what happened to her.
Agreed. Good point. I would first like to note that Lauren also had a heart condition known as long QT, which is an increased risk of irregular heartbeat, which can lead to fainting, drowning, seizures, or sudden death. After doing further research, because I've never heard of it before, that it's actually very common and is the 3 most common forms of sudden death.
And that's something that eventually comes up later, so we're just trying to brief you a little bit for when it eventually comes up.
Something else, little background, on September 2nd, 2010, 9 months before her disappearance, she was arrested for both public intoxication and illegal consumption, which again is not that rare.
No, but the reason that it kind of gets brought up a lot in this case, I feel like, is because it speaks to what her tolerance may have been if this was something that she was doing frequently, like every weekend, drinking, binge drinking a pretty excessive amount. That can factor into how long it might take her to sober up or how much alcohol it might take her to get inebriated. And the idea that this pattern of behavior before she disappeared wasn't that far out of the realm of possibility for a regular weekend.
At the time of her disappearance, she was dating someone. Her boyfriend was named Jesse. She met him and a friend named Jay years prior. They met at Camp Towanda, that's located in a mountain town in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. As you could probably gather, Scarsdale, Honesdale both have large Jewish communities, and through her faith, that is how she came to meet. This comes at no surprise in that she met them and many other of her close friends who all became students at IU. It was very clear in all of my research that she was very active in the Jewish community at IU. On the night she disappeared, Lauren was out drinking with friends, but her boyfriend Jesse was not among them. They did, however, text back and forth throughout the night before he had went to bed. So you won't be hearing about Jesse again for a while, but now you know who he is when he reappears.
I think that that's probably enough to get everyone started and give them an idea. So we have Lauren, we have her boyfriend Jesse, who isn't there, gave a little bit of background of her friend Jay, who also had met Jay at Camp Towanda, and Jay's about to come up any second. So I think we can get into the timeline.
Now, the timeline that we're working on was created by the Bloomington police using video footage and witness statements, and then we've gone in and filled in additional details that were released later or reported on after this original timeline was created.
So all of our sources for this episode and every episode are in our link tree in the show notes. For this particular episode, there's like 25 sources, and that's partly just to try and be thorough, but also we came across a few different discrepancies that we'll be bringing up later.
Just you wait.
So the timeline begins on Friday, June 3rd, 2011. At 12:30 a.m., Lauren leaves her apartment in the Smallwood apartment complex with her friend and namer David. The pair travel 3 blocks away to Lauren friend's Jay's apartment to pregame. As far as we can tell, Jay frequently had small to mid-sized group gatherings of 10 or so people, and according to reports, a keg was present and there was some drug use that had taken place, but most of the hard liquor was gone by this time. At some point in the first hour of being there, Lauren decided to leave with a new friend she had met recently named Corey, who lived 2 doors down from Jay in the 5 North townhomes. There are conflicting reports of a few things concerning at this time. The first conflicting report is when Lauren first met Corey. Some of the sources cite that they had met the week before the gathering at Jay's, while others report it wasn't until that very night. The second part of the conflicting report is that most sources indicate that Corey and his roommate Mike were present at the party at this time, while others state that Lauren walked down to Corey's apartment to retrieve him.
And I just want to point out really quick that the source that states that Lauren walked down to Corey's apartment to retrieve him it'll be at like the top of the sources, but a journalist walked through the entire timeline and was speaking with police as he did it. So even though that he was one of the only sources I saw that said that Lauren walked down to the apartment versus Corey already being there, I felt that the fact that this timeline, he was interviewing the police department as he did the timeline, was enough to include it in this.
Agreed.
Noteworthy.
Include everything. That's all I say. 1:46 a.m. Lauren enters Kilroy Sports Bar accompanied by Corey. Due to surveillance inside and outside the bar, we know that the time of her arrival and departure from Kilroy's, as well as her activities while inside the bar, are pretty accurate. During her time there, Corey also purchased drinks for them both.
So according to some of our patrons who were attending IU at this time, the fact that Lauren was only 20 would later lead to a crackdown on campus for local bars. So prior to this time, there are indications that several of the bars in the area, they would let patrons in that weren't legal drinking age, but in order to actually purchase alcohol, you had to be carded. So like an 18 and up club, but the bars were functioning as if they were 18 and up clubs. But no one was being carded to enter the establishment, just to get drinks. So someone, Corey in this case, was able to buy drinks and then just bring them to the table.
I have personally witnessed that happened with the gay bars in Metro Detroit.
Oh, absolutely.
I've never not witnessed this happen. Is there an alternative?
Yeah, well, at the time when I grew up, 18 years old, I was getting into the gay bars and not necessarily drinking. But I remember there being huge crackdowns and huge tickets and huge, minors in possessions at all of these gay bars because gay bars were known to let younger kids in. And during that time period, a lot of them switched to being 21 and up only to avoid all of police activity. 2:27 a.m. Lauren exits Kilroy Bar with Corey, leaving her cell phone and shoes behind at the bar. Side note, just so you guys are aware, she had taken off her shoes when she walked onto the sand-covered patio. So this was a bar who had like a sand-covered patio, and it was very custom for people to take off their socks and shoes to go outside.
It's part of their gimmick.
This is a reasonable level of weird.
Yeah, it's part of their come to our bar versus the other bar down the street attracting college kids. We have this fake beach.
And I've done it. I've done it personally at events at gay bars that I've worked at where we had a sand company come in and bring pounds and pounds of sand and covered our entire patio. Also on surveillance, Corey is seen walking with Lauren to her apartment complex at 2:27. At 2:30, Lauren is seen entering Smallwood Plaza Apartments where her residence is located. Corey and Lauren got off of the elevators on the 5th floor where they encountered a witness named Zach and 3 of his friends. Zach had noticed that Lauren was extremely inebriated and asked if she was okay. During this conversation, Zach reportedly told Corey that he needed to take her to her apartment, and Corey allegedly replied something to the tune of "fuck you, I got it." And Zach then allegedly punched him in the jaw, and Corey fell, hitting his head on the tile floor of the alcove. They took the elevator back down and walked down the street, where a witness who was visiting her boyfriend from out of town saw the two sitting on some stairs, with Lauren sitting a few stairs higher than Corey. At this time, she witnessed Lauren tip over and hit her head. According to her, she could physically hear her head make contact with the concrete.
Yeah, and this would be the first of 2 times that we know of that Lauren hit her head and injured herself in some way on this walk home.
Right, so Lauren is seen stumbling and ends up falling. Her reaction time is slow at this point. She doesn't break her fall. At 2:48 to 2:51 a.m., leaving the apartments, the pair proceeded to an alley that runs between College Avenue and Morton Street. They exited the alley and walked toward the parking lot near 5 North Townhomes. Lauren's keys and purse would later be found in this alley. At 10th and College, they enter an apartment building and knocked on the door of 4 girls who had been with them earlier in the night, but no one answers. Corey helps her up and at some point picks her up to carry her. From here on, the timeline is pieced all together almost exclusively through witness statements. Shortly after leaving the alley, the pair arrive at Corey's apartment. Michael, who is Corey's roommate, is present and would later tell police that Corey was very intoxicated and stumbling. Michael had to help Corey to his bed, and Corey had vomited on his way up the stairs. Mike said that he then tried to persuade Lauren to sleep over for her own safety, but that Lauren had wanted to return home. We now fast forward to 3:30 a.m. So she's there for give or take more than half an hour, but not 45 minutes.
I mean, obviously, we know that this part of the timeline is witness statements, but I feel like a half an hour of trying to get someone to stay, kind of makes sense.
he had to get Corey to bed and he had to vomit and maybe they had to clean it up. So Lauren's sticking around and he's trying to talk to her into staying. Like a half an hour, it seems completely plausible.
Everything takes longer when you're drunk.
Correct. So now we are at 3:30 a.m. Michael said that he phoned his neighbor, Jay. Obviously, Jay knows him and he wanted him to take care of Lauren. Michael said that Lauren was attempting to get Michael to drink with her. She eventually went to Jay's apartment where he observed a bruise under her eye, presumably sustained in a fall earlier that evening.
Wait, which he? Jay saw the bruise? Okay.
Yeah, Jay saw the bruise once he arrived at her apartment. She told him that she didn't know how she got the bruise. 2 calls were placed from Jay's phone shortly before she was reported to have left. Jay said Lauren placed both calls, one to David and one to another friend. Neither picked up, and no messages were left. 4:30 a.m. Jay reports that Lauren left the apartment. This is the last reported sighting of her by any witness. He reported last seeing Lauren at the intersection of 11th Street and College Avenue, headed south on College. She was last seen barefoot, wearing black leggings and a white shirt. Several hours later that morning, Jesse sent Lauren a text. He received a reply from an employee at the bar. Jesse then contacted Lauren's roommate, who gave him a key to their shared apartment so that Jesse could check on her. And that's when Jesse reported Lauren missing. Shitty friends, or was it more?
Okay, a couple things before we get started, before I forget anything. So the reason, allegedly, that Lauren places the call to 2 people, one of them being David, we don't know who the other person was because the police have not released that information, but allegedly, the reason that she calls David is because she thinks that David has her phone. Because David also, at some point, had showed up to the bar. So Lauren, the reason she's calling David is because she thinks that he has her phone.
Is it reported that David showed up at the bar, or is it on surveillance that David showed up at the bar? Because he wasn't on surveillance leaving with them, correct?
He wasn't on surveillance leaving with them, but a couple of people from Jay's, to my understanding, including David, but not Jay himself, had showed up at the bar after Lauren and Corey were already there. But they didn't arrive together, and they didn't leave together.
Right, gotcha. After much more digging on various platforms, I did stumble on perhaps a bit more information on Reddit. Where this information comes from and its facts are 2 separate questions. Jay reported that Lauren had snorted Klonopin and cocaine.
This becomes a real point of contention. I feel like with Lauren's parents down the road, I obviously can't speak for them, but I think maybe they felt like drug use being brought into it made her seem like less of a victim or less innocent in whatever happened to her.
But why didn't Jay report that to the cops originally?
From what I understand, Jay did.
Okay.
I know that this is one of those things where there's information on Reddit and there's information in all these different sources. So the police themselves said something to the tune of there was reported drug use, indicating that Lauren had taken drugs. But aside from Reddit, I didn't find anything specific citing Klonopin and cocaine. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Right.
There was a whole bunch of different sources that were cited by various people and various write-ups and various articles quoting other articles, that those original articles no longer exist. Whether the police had them taken down because they didn't want X, Y, or Z information out there, or something about them was factually inaccurate and that's why they took them down. Who knows?
I just don't know why it was omitted from the police timeline.
I think that there's so much information that the police know and haven't released, and I couldn't tell you why that is. Obviously, there's always the question of guilty knowledge, of we need some things that only the perpetrator would know. I just don't see how this, like, concealing this much information is helpful, but they know something that we don't know.
Yeah. The biggest inconsistency that I have found, that according to this comparison to the police report, is that they were intercepted by Zach and his quote-unquote crew of people. Corey was supposedly punched in the face during an altercation. Witnesses and video footage show that Lauren was stumbling badly and fell hard quite a few times. Corey is seen finally picking her up and carrying her. What we don't know is if Michael walked her to Jay's apartment or she left on her own. There are differing stories. Jay says he tried to get her to stay. But I want to know who the other call was, too. Like, why is that completely omitted? Why is that not ever to be found? Research that I've done, I can't find it anywhere.
Some of the reports seem to leave out whether or not she walked to Jay's or not. We know that Michael called Jay, but also their apartments were only 2 doors down.
Right.
So that could have something to do with it. It literally could have been he went in the hallway, Jay went in the hallway, and Mike went in the hallway, and she walked 2 doors down, and it was like, okay, you got her. And
this
that
is
was
yours
it.
now.
Because they're so close to each other, it's not like they're walking.
But why is it omitted, the second call? Like, I mean, obviously, if she disappeared that night, Jay was the last person she was with. She used his phone to call 2 people, but yet we're going to omit what that other phone call was.
Sometimes it's just left out because it's irrelevant. Like,
I mean,
It
it
could
could
be.
be.
if I'd
It could
rather
be that
I
they
know.
don't want armchair detectives, such as ourselves, to start digging up someone's life. You know? It could have just been like, oh, I tried to call Aunt Carol. It's not
Yeah.
Aunt Carol.
But even if it was irrelevant, you could still include it. Like, if it's irrelevant, it's, why omit it? Why is it nowhere to be found? It's, I don't know.
As
That's
we've
just
seen in
something
other
that-
cases, the cops are always perfect at their jobs.
So let's get into the timeline after the disappearance. In 2011, police, FBI, and college police did a 9-day search of a landfill in Pimento, just south of the college. It is where trash from Bloomington goes to, so it's kind of like the first stop where all trash goes to from the city. They were hoping to find Lauren's remains. And just 2 years into the investigation, over 3,000 tips were received. The parents of Lauren filed a civil lawsuit against Jay, Corey, and Michael, accusing them of negligence. For one, supplying her with alcohol after being visibly intoxicated, but also not returning her safely home. The intent of the parents, from what I had researched, were that they were just hoping more information would come to light, that they weren't necessarily accusing one person over the other. They just thought that if they lit a little bit of fire, like, more information would come.
Which is very fair.
Or that during discovery, they would find something out.
Right.
But
right.
I know that we've talked about this a little bit just together as we were going through the case.
Right.
It is a slippery slope to even try something like this because we know that Mike pretty much didn't know Lauren at all. Corey knew Lauren a little bit. They hadn't known each other for very long, but Mike was Corey's roommate.
Right.
And so Mike is in this very interesting position where he has this girl and he doesn't know her and he can't try and trap her and prevent her from leaving because she's drunk. It's not like she's about to drive a car.
Right.
You know, it's not like she's getting in a car and he's preventing a crime from being taken place. Holding her would have looked real bad on him.
Absolutely. Especially because they had no prior relationship. Yeah. And it's college. He's a guy. She's a girl. There's so many.
Can I make it any more obvious?
Yeah, weird place for an Avril Lavigne reference, but okay. And then we have Corey, who was with her at the time and participating in drinking with her. But obviously, Corey is either inebriated or, as will come up in a few moments, is concussed. We know that he threw up. We know that he smacked his head on the tile floor after Zach basically knocked him out, and that he hit the ground hard enough and he hit tile floor with his head. So now we have Corey vomiting. It could be from the alcohol. He could have a concussion.
Could be a combination.
But either way, he is not in a position to be making decisions for himself, let alone someone else. So then all we have left in that situation, as far as a potential lawsuit goes, is Jay. And while Jay and her have been friends for a long time, when you start having people assume responsibility for other people, especially since Jay was having the house party that night, we have to assume that Jay is in some way intoxicated.
Yeah.
And we also should point out really quick that pretty much none of these people have vehicles. A friend that is staying with Jay, which we'll bring up in a moment, he has a car, but he's the only one that I've seen cited sources for owning a vehicle.
Right.
And having it on campus.
Right.
So then it becomes the question of, okay, if she decides she wants to leave, are they obligated to walk her home at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Right.
Like, where does the obligation end? And that is a slippery slope for precedent for a lawsuit. And a lot of times, the precedent becomes what's important of whether or not a case is going to go. Because it becomes okay, if I let this go, where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
What does this set a precedent for? And I just think it wasn't ever going to go anywhere. Unfortunately, they really didn't get to do the discovery portion, much of it, before the case was outright dismissed.
At Jewelers Mutual, we're a little obsessed with jewelry. Obsessed like auctioneers with talking fast.
50, we're going to fit.
Pop stars with auto-tune. And dentists with asking questions.
So, how did he propose?
After they've put their hands in your mouth.
Great.
Yes, we've made jewelry our obsession for over 100 years. We love it so much we named our kids Ruby, Amber, and Opal.
Venti soy latte for Opal?
At Jewelers Mutual, we insure jewelry and only jewelry, which is why people who are also obsessed with jewelry trust us with theirs.
I have to inject my own personal opinion here because I ultimately think the other two, besides Jay, have no ground. But I do think that Jay has some type of responsibility of negligence here. She has no shoes, she has no cell phone, she has no identification on her. Walking home is not safe.
And I'm not saying that he's not a horrible friend, but in terms of negligence, where do we decide?
My point is just that the other two have no responsibility of negligence whatsoever. But I think Jay has some. And I don't know how I would interpret the law either in that given sense, but the fact that she's intoxicated, doesn't have shoes, doesn't have identification, and doesn't have a cell phone leads me to think personally that I wouldn't let a friend walk home, even if it was 2 blocks away from my house.
And I totally get that point of view. And that's like obviously a very friendship point of view. We're trying to take in account what is normal and what you should do as a human being and as a friend versus what you are legally obligated or what you should be responsible for.
Right.
But this is where we have to bring up the fact that this seems like it was a pattern of behavior. Again, that doesn't mean that anything that happens to Lauren or happened to Lauren is her fault. We know that according to the timeline given by the police or by witness statements, between 3:30 and 4:30 so for about an hour, Jay says that he's trying to convince Lauren to stay. How many times has he had to try and convince Lauren to stay? How many times has everything just worked out fine? And so he decides it's 4:30 in the morning, I'm giving up, she doesn't want to stay.
Right.
I tried. There's also the idea that, okay, she's been there for an hour. She left the bar at 2:37. So It's also been 2 hours since she's drank anything. Do we know if she was sobering up at all? Do we know anything about her state when she left? If there was anything that indicated to Jay that, she's been this amount of drunk before and walked home fine. She's an adult. I'm just going to let her make her own decision.
And there's a level of, if she is using cocaine and when she used it and how often she was using that night, that could completely reverse what you see as effect of the alcohol and her ability to do things, because cocaine has been known to sober up even the drunkest of people and allow them to function more easily.
Right. And then eventually
once under the influence, and then once it wears off, it's the effects of the alcohol come right back into play, and she's stumbling around and can't whatever. So it's hard to tell. I mean, she could have done it in between the apartments of going to Jay's house and sobered up a little bit and was able to, seem like she was okay to walk home, You never know.
Or anything in between, because we know literally nothing.
Correct. Because we don't know. But let's go over what actually happened. So in 2013, a judge dismissed the case against Michael, being that he had no duty to care for her. And that was purely what the judge said. He had absolutely no duty to care for her. There was no prior relationship. She was walking. She was not driving.
And I feel like if he did have a duty, that by calling Jay, the court might have felt like he fulfilled that duty.
He fulfilled that duty, yeah.
He made an attempt.
In 2014, just a year later, another judge dismissed the other two men. None of them have ever been named suspects to this day. In April 2015, the Bloomington police announced that they were investigating a possible link between Lauren's disappearance and the murder of another IU student, Hannah Wilson. Wilson went missing on April 24, 2015, after visiting Kilroy's, the same bar that Lauren had visited the night she disappeared. Wilson was last seen getting into a taxi in front of the bar and driving away. Her body was found the next morning in Brown County. A local man named Daniel Messel was arrested for the murder after his cell phone was discovered near the body.
The idea that the cell phone was discovered near the body kind of led to some contention too. So the state arrested and worked on Daniel Messel's case.
Yeah.
They believe that he might have had something to do with Lauren's case.
Right.
But the local police that worked on Lauren's case don't believe that he did. And part of that seems to be from an outsider perspective, which is all that I can give, because of how sloppy Daniel was in leaving the cell phone behind.
Was he sloppy, or was it planted?
Or was it arrogance? Was it, I did this a million times and this time he just so happened to slip up? Or I've stalked women. Maybe necessarily he hadn't abducted them or hurt them in any way, but had stalked them before. And just this time, the time that he got caught, he was unlucky. You have to think everyone that ever gets caught, no matter how many times they have committed crimes, eventually they are caught because they make a mistake.
Right. Leaving a cell phone near a body seems like a stupid mistake to me.
It really does, but think
Amateur
about
hour.
how many pockets. Does anybody else have bad pockets?
I don't wear my bad pants for murders.
I just want to go back and correct myself really quick. So Ted Adams was the prosecutor that worked the murder case against Messel, and he was the one that believes that he possibly could have had something to do with Lauren's disappearance.
Gotcha.
Also, Daniel Messel took a plea deal that didn't include the murder charge, but did include some other charges, because throughout 2012, there were a number of incidents involving a number of different women, 5 different women, that he had basically terrorized them in some way throughout 2012, only a year after Lauren disappeared. And so I think that that's part of why Prosecutor Adams thinks that they could be related, because
And these were all in the same area?
they're all in the same area, and that he was outside of Kilroy's bar and he might have been out there multiple times, that we know that he was active in 2012, only a year after. And so I think some of those things
Gotcha.
are leading people to believe, okay, maybe we should look into him more.
Have they not hooked the guy up to a lie detector and asked him?
Well, it's also jurisdiction issues, because I believe the state police were in charge of Hannah's case, but the local police were in charge of Lauren's case. And so I'm not sure how much information would have to be known to suspect him enough to even go through with a lie detector test or get him to agree to a lie detector test.
So either way, in July 2015, it was concluded that the two cases were unrelated and any similarities between the two cases were purely coincidental.
I would really like to see this case get the Egypt Covington treatment and be transferred to state police.
And is solved in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Although the FBI did get involved at a point working with the landfill. So I'm kind of curious as to if that was just they were brought on to assist, which is what it sounds like.
Right. Her mother posted 9 years after her disappearance on Facebook, reflecting on their loss, thinks she has not found the truth, thinks people are lying, does not think this was random, and that they will never give up. She has also stated in an interview last year that she believes in hope, but truly believes that she is gone. It is answers and justice that they seek, if there is any. In January 2016, the FBI raided a house that was suspected to be a home to a man who was connected to exposing himself to young women. The investigators reported no connection to the man who was later arrested.
There's a couple more things.
I feel like there's 10,000 things we haven't discussed.
I have to include something in the timeline. So, something that seems to not get talked about nearly at all is that around 4:35 in the morning, about 5 minutes after Lauren left Jay's apartment, a homeless man in the area reported hearing a woman scream just west to where Lauren was last seen. So this man is believed to be two people. I've heard from multiple sources for both of them. One of those sides says that this homeless man was Franklin Road Dog Crawford, who ended up dying a couple days after Lauren's disappearance. He was found deceased in a dumpster. The other one is just as strange. A homeless man named Tallboy who allegedly disappeared from the area completely after this. So I've heard both that it was Road Dog and that it was Tallboy, and then I've heard both sides say, no, you have the wrong story, it was Tallboy, or no, you have the wrong story, it was Road Dog. Road Dog has been reported more, but I have seen a lot of Tallboy floating out on the internet. Right. I haven't seen any official police source saying the name of the person, but I do know that a homeless person walked a reporter through the scene of that night at some point, a local news report. And I couldn't find that actual news report. I just found citations of the news report, and then the link to it was dead. So either a homeless man heard the scream,
was murdered,
mysteriously was murdered, or a homeless man heard the scream and mysteriously vanished from the area. Either of them do not inspire any kind of confidence to me. I also want to point out, when we talk about Jay last seeing Lauren walking away, and he reports, I saw her she was almost at the intersection, about to cross the street. The street that she was about to be walking on was the street that her apartment was on, which was about 3 blocks away from 5 North Townhomes. Mm-hmm. Jay was on the balcony of his apartment building smoking. So that's how Jay watches her walk down the street while he's smoking. So it's not like he was looking out a window, or like, why did Jay see her for that long? Or why didn't Jay see her for longer?
And he may have been purposely out there making sure that she was walking in the right direction. And
like, I'm just going to keep an eye on you till you get to the corner and I finish my cigarette. Or I'm just coincidentally finishing my cigarette and I might as well, there's nothing else out here. It's
right,
4:30
which is
in the morning.
Why also they could have dismissed him as being negligent.
Right.
Or this was a convenient cover story.
So this is also the point that we have to bring up, that if Lauren would have walked home and reached her apartment, she would not have had her keys with her because she dropped them, her student ID, which it seems through context clues that she would have needed to get into the actual apartment building. Like it was one of those swipey deals, or you needed a key to get into the apartment. If anybody's ever lived in a dorm, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Or if you've went outside of a hotel at night, but you've used a side door versus the main lobby where you have to swipe to get in. So that becomes, we think Lauren went one way. She was almost to her street the last time, allegedly, Jay sees her. Does she realize at some point that she doesn't have her keys?
Right.
She doesn't have her phone. She doesn't have her ID. Does she try and walk somewhere else? Does she course correct? Does she change directions to go somewhere else? We don't know.
Right.
Does she have a concussion? Does she realize she's not wearing shoes? There's so much unknown here.
Someone that has frequently not worn shoes, like in the summer, walking down the street, being a mess, she probably realized at some point she didn't have shoes and was just like, don't care. Yeah, and if she would have even thought to go back to the bar at that point, the bar would have been closed. So it then becomes how much presence of mind did she have to know,
Right.
okay, the bar's closed, I can't go there, or hey, I'm walking home. A lot of women will go for their keys as they're walking at night. Who knows if at some point she went for her keys or went to pull out keys on her way home and realized at that point she didn't have them.
Or did she already know all this back when she called David, which is phone, when she was like, fuck, where's my phone? Fuck, where's my keys?
She could have been trying to call David not only because she thought that David had her phone, but also because David was her neighbor and could let her into the apartment, which is why I question the second phone call and whether or not that second phone call, why wouldn't it have been to her roommate?
Or her boyfriend.
Or her boyfriend. Or was it one of them and the police just aren't telling us?
The whole Zach altercation has me more interested than anything else.
So I've seen reports two different ways. That Zach just knew Lauren from the building or from school. And then I've also seen reports that Zach was friends with Jesse. And
Right.
so it then becomes a question of, okay, was Zach's motivations to say, like, that's my bro's girlfriend?
And he's never seen Corey before.
Are you going to take advantage of her? Yeah, him not knowing Corey.
Right.
And so that becomes, what is the motivation? At some point, a couple different things happen. At some point, all of her friends and her boyfriend, so Jesse, Corey, I believe Mike and Jay, all of them go for polygraph testing at a private facility. Basically lawyering up, saying, okay, well, we're going to a private place because we don't trust X, Y, or Z. It seems like pretty immediately Lauren's parents had a lot of questions. And part of that questioning seemed to spook people.
Right.
And Lauren's mom and Jesse's mom seem to have a lot of feuding take place. For example, right after Lauren goes missing, a couple weeks after, Jesse's parents basically have him come home. They have him come home to New York. And that kind of rubbed Lauren's family the wrong way. We're all here. There's volunteers. We're looking for her. Why aren't you looking for her? But also at this time, the family seemed to already be concerned with Jay and Corey and whether or not they might have been involved. So I don't know if maybe Jesse's family was like, we want to get you out of this situation because it seems like there's some finger pointing going on and we don't want there to be finger pointing going on in regards to you.
But it also could have just been emotional, like, security of taking their son home to be with them in a time of mourning.
Holy shit, your girlfriend's gone missing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was summer, and it also could have been that he wasn't going to be staying there, or his lease was up, or who knows. I don't know the situation, just that's how it's perceived from the outside. And Jesse's mom kind of went after
what was the quote?
Jesse's mother was quoted as saying, I don't think they're, meaning the local police department, are very adept at anything except giving kids drinking tickets. I don't trust them, period. Also said, the poor little girl is not with us today because of her drug abuse, which is just honestly really disgusting to me.
Yeah.
Because we don't know that her doing any kind of recreational substance had anything to do with what happened to her. There's no one is to say that even if she was completely sober, that someone couldn't have taken her. If it's a 6-foot college dude, she doesn't have to be inebriated in some way for something to befall her. There was also, in regards to that, a lot of reporting surrounding Jesse saying that obviously we can only take any of this with a grain of salt, but saying that Jesse seemed like an attentive boyfriend, that him and Lauren had talked about substance abuse in the past, and him feeling like maybe she was getting a little too rowdy, and it was something that they had kind of butted heads with over a few times before, but not necessarily something. It was more like it's appeared that people perceived it as him trying to help her. Obviously, we don't know if that's true. That's just rumors, but there's a lot of rumors in this area, especially considering this is a college town and it's such a mystery that, of course, there's going to be a lot of local rumors. But one of those local rumors is that she was tossed into the Ohio River. This second Corey, a different Corey, that was in jail, had told his cellmate or somebody else that was in jail that he knew that girl that was on the news, and that there was these rumors that she had OD'd at a party and that she was tossed in the Ohio River. Obviously, that's completely unsubstantiated. That also brings up the question of it would be at least like 3 hours round trip. Whose car did they take? How were they able to make it back if that were to have happened?
Yeah, apparently he was in jail when he saw her on the TV and immediately looked up and was like, man, I knew the guys that did that. That's when another inmate spoke to ABC News about it, and that's when they questioned him, and he said that they were drinking and doing ecstasy, and she OD'd. It scared them. They didn't know what to do with her, so they took her to the Ohio River and disposed of her body.
So let's talk about this mysterious second David that was staying with Jay at the time this all took place.
Secret David.
Allegedly, Jay had a friend from Michigan that was visiting him. He was a graduate at U of M. And this reporting was actually from Scott Bernstein, who does a lot of organized crime reporting concerning Michigan. Also did an entire series on the Joanne Matuk Romaine story that we've covered, and he is a decorated reporter. He did a special to the Macomb Daily talking about David. Allegedly, this other David, during the party, and he left at 5 o'clock in the morning. There are different reports, but from what I've seen, between 5 and 6 or 5 and 6:30 in the morning, at some point in there, he left to go home. Whether that was planned that he was going to leave that early in the morning, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't find any indications whether or not that was always the plan, whether or not he was just coming for the night, whether or not he was supposed to stay for the weekend. Any of that, the police never really paid much attention to him or brought him up in many things. It seems like other outside reporting organizations found that out and then reported on it, but I haven't seen actual police information concerning whether or not that was ever taken into consideration, whether or not he was ever a potential suspect, which I don't believe so. I don't think there's ever actually been a potential suspect named in this case. There's been a lot of suspicion thrown.
I mean, that could have been the car.
Yeah, when we come back to if something happened and she was transported, there is then now the possibility that she had a car, but also that Ohio River story, still, it would have been 3 hours at least for the Ohio River theory or rumor to have happened.
But it doesn't negate the original theory that I had when I was investigating this case, that it was an OD or a heart complication with her drug usage or with her alcohol or a concussion of somehow she just died at Jay's place.
So I would say that that's the main theory, is that at some point she died at Jay's place and
it was covered up.
And it was covered up because it involved drug use. The problem I have is that police brought cadaver dogs to search the townhouse, and the cadaver dogs never indicated. Also, the idea that a bunch of drunk college kids were able to
commit the perfect murder.
Not even murder, but
Not
to
murder.
conceal a death, that there was no DNA, that there was no substances that would have happened post-mortem. Getting rid of basically everything and being able to get rid of a body, especially because this college campus has a lot of cameras, which is where a lot of people have questions.
Yeah, she's seen walking away, so
Yeah, how come doesn't show up on X, Y, or Z camera? Does she switch directions? Does something happen to her in between these two cameras? For a while, the police were looking for a white truck. They then, I guess, found the owners of that white truck and said, this person is no longer a suspect. Like, you know, this is X, Y, or Z is what they're doing. This was their alibi. But the police were monitoring all of these cameras. And I would have to believe, I would hope that anybody that was at any of the apartments or townhouses that night that had a vehicle, that their vehicle would have been checked in all of the nearby cameras to see if it ever left. You just would absolutely hope so. I can't imagine that they wouldn't.
Like I said, that was my original theory, but as I dive further and all the surveillance videos and everything else, it quickly became that maybe that's not the case. But, I mean, anything's possible.
It becomes, what the fuck, where did all these cameras go? Why is there where's the next step in the piece?
Yeah, Jay is also from Michigan, by the way, and he went to Cranbrook. That's a private school, and that's an 8 Mile reference. But it's a very well-to-do area. Let me just give you a reference. Cranbrook has a museum that is part of the Cranbrook Institute that has a dinosaur in it.
Yeah.
oh, that kind of money. Dinosaur
I think her
money.
name's Sally.
Yes.
This case is straight fuckery. I just want to reiterate on the homeless man hearing the scream. It was the 15th source in. After I found the entire lawsuit, after all of these things, it is the 15th source in that I first saw this homeless man mentioned.
Quality reporting.
Yeah, there was a lot of reporting that the boys weren't being cooperative, and I think the perception of that is because I think their lawyers told them to shut their mouths. But They did interview with police. They did allegedly take private polygraph tests. Again, we cannot say that a polygraph test does not prove your guilt or innocence. They do fail. There's a bunch of different statistics about whether or not they're up to 80% accurate or whether they're 60% effective. But you're more likely to fail a polygraph test and be innocent, allegedly, than you are to be guilty and pass one. Mostly because there's so many different things that go into polygraph testing. I wouldn't take a polygraph test, and I would not suggest any of our listeners take a polygraph test. I suggest you get a lawyer. The only time that I would take a polygraph test would be, I feel like the police are focusing way too much on me, and one of my loved ones' life could be at risk. Let's say my niece is missing, and they're like, you're looking awfully suspicious, and I'm like, I'm really not. And then again, they're like, you look awfully suspicious. At that point, I'm probably just going to say, just give me a polygraph test so you can rule me out or look at somebody else because it's not me and you're wasting time.
Don't take polygraphs. They don't stand up in court anyway.
Yeah, they don't. All they do is indicate where you may or may not being truthful so the police can then question you more about what you're not being truthful on, press you to see if you'll give them anything or anything that might lead them in a direction. If I was going to take one and I felt like the police were coming a little too hard for me, and I felt like they were being a little more shady than I would like, or there was some reason that I didn't trust X, Y, or Z detective that was in charge of the case, I might go to a third party and say, okay, where is it some independent polygraph company that I can go to that is accepted for third parties by your county?
Right.
Whatever your county recommends, I'm going there. At some point, Jay's lawyer, James Voiles, had told the Macomb Daily that the idea or perception that Jay was being anything other than totally cooperative or has any kind of additional information that he wasn't willing to share is patently false. Of course, unquote, that is a lawyer statement. So take that with a grain of salt because it's a lawyer statement. But it does seem, after looking up things about, okay, were they taking polygraphs? Were they pressured to take polygraphs? That they were being cooperative up until maybe a certain point, and it feels like that point is around the time that Lauren's family started saying, you guys know more than what you're saying. I think that's all of the theories that I have heard. I do know that locally, it seems like everyone has an opinion about what may or may not have happened. It seems like the OD theory or the heart problem, sudden death theory is the most prevalent of the theories.
Or a complete stranger picking her up after completely vulnerable is probably the second that I've mostly come across. Is that it was somebody locally or some stranger that had picked her up from Jay's to her apartment.
The problem with both of those theories is, where is this vehicle that someone is transporting Lauren in on the cameras? Whether that is somebody that she actually personally knows vehicle or one of their friends' vehicles, or the person that potentially picked her up. How does she reach the corner on the way to her apartment and disappear?
I mean, anyone could have picked her up, offered her a ride.
Absolutely. But the idea is, then where is their car? How come that car doesn't show up on a camera 6 blocks away going down? There's not very many main roads. There's only so many alleys that someone could travel down before their car is picked up by surveillance. This is a college town. The businesses have cameras. Apartments have cameras. There's cameras everywhere.
But even the alleyway where she lost her purse
had cameras at the entrance and at the exit. Even if they would have pulled in somewhere, eventually they would have had to pull out. One of the things that I want to mention is that there was lots of reports that Daniel Messel had been dressed and posing multiple times as a security guard when he was sexually assaulting women. Are there any figures that maybe seemed very unassuming, seemed like, oh, that's one of the security guards, that's campus security? Somebody might have saw them and not thought anything of them that night because, oh, that just looked like a security guard, or that just looked like somebody that works the desk for X, Y, or Z apartment building, because there's so many apartment buildings in this area and townhomes.
And I'm sure there's campus security at all times.
That's also a question I have in terms of when they were first getting the video surveillance from nearby areas. One, if someone was posing as a security guard and had been watching for cameras, if they had done this before and knew where the blind spots were of various cameras. Did they take her and then wait out somewhere for, let's say, even a day or 12 hours to where the police caught something on camera, but they're looking in the wrong time frame on the surveillance?
Right.
Honestly, that's the best thought.
I feel like in any of the theories, to me, that would make the most sense because
of the surveillance.
No matter where she disappeared from, whether she actually disappeared, something happened to her in Jay's apartment, or she was on her way home and something happened to her, eventually she needed to be moved for no one to find her.
Correct.
So how does someone move a whole entire person without being spotted in this college town full of surveillance? I feel like the most likely option for me is that they knew where cameras were. They knew where a blind spot was. They lived in another nearby apartment, or had somebody in a nearby apartment that they could pull her into, so that when the cops came with cadaver dogs to the townhomes, they were looking in the wrong spot.
And she also could have been alive.
Completely. She could have been taken alive and kept alive, especially because we know with a lot of people, things escalate, right? You have people like Amanda Berry that were kidnapped, and after a certain amount of time, people had kind of given up hope and thought that she would never be found, that perhaps she had been murdered, and then was able to escape years and years later. That was in Cleveland. That was in a major city with tons of people that could have potentially witnessed it. but she was missing for 10 years before she was able to be freed along with Gina. There's always the option that someone abducted her and she is still alive. Now, I will say that obviously we don't always count that as the most likely of scenarios. But when we have somebody like Daniel Messel, who was assaulting people and taking people before he eventually graduated to murder, who's to say that that isn't another person, or that isn't Daniel Messel who took her, or, you know, somebody else?
But also, with how little we know what's going on here, hits her head, amnesia, doesn't know who she is, still alive to this day.
Yeah.
Unlikely.
True.
Incredibly unlikely. Not putting my money on it. Technically possible.
So if you have any theories or have heard any theories that we didn't cover today, please let us know. We obviously were scouring corners of the internet, just trying to figure out what locals thought.
How many homeless men were involved helping out the case and then murdered?
I have never seen so much like disinformation, I don't think. There's been a lot of cases that I've been trying to research where there's very little information. There was a lot of pretty conflicting reports in this, especially not finding the homeless man hearing the scream, which would have been 5 minutes-ish later after her leaving Jay's, and not finding that until the 15th news source. That's crazy to me.
Yeah. And in the original report, Zach had just checked on her. There was no altercation. There was no fight. There was no anything.
Skull to the tile.
It was just, Zach checking on her, making sure she got home okay. That's that.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's because over time the police are choosing to release little small details here and there just to see if it generates any more tips that are usable, or they've exhausted their tips. Okay, let's give them another nugget of information and see if that jars anything for someone. Or if it's a matter of, oh, well, this is guilty knowledge and we're not sure what we want to release, but then somehow something leaks and they have to go with it. Or a reporter is like a dog with a bone and eventually gets that information through other means, through interviewing witnesses themselves, and that information comes out. Or how much is reporters hearing rumors and using them as facts, as truth, and presenting them in that way, which leads us to believe that those are factual statements.
If there's anyone who has any first-hand knowledge of what could have happened to Lauren, we here at the Deep Dark Truth beg you to contact the proper authorities in any of these ways. The Bloomington Police Department, 812-339-4471. Or at Bo Didle and Associates, 800-777-9366, or email helpfindlauren@gmail.com, or find Lauren, P.O. Box 1226, Bloomington, Indiana 47402.
That is all we have for today. We'll see you next time. I'm Mo.
I'm Chip.
And I'm Mikey.
Or are we?
You just listened to the Deep Dark Truth Podcast. See you next time. And remember, your local cryptids want to meet you.